The notification sound from my phone cuts through the silence of my dorm room at exactly 11:47 p.m. I'm hunched over my statistics textbook, highlighter cap between my teeth, when the Instagram story pops up on my screen. My sister Emma, radiant in a custom Vera Wang gown, champagne flute raised high, surrounded by 300 guests at the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. The caption reads, "Best day ever, #blessed, #dream wedding." I stare at the image until my eyes water, not from joy, but from something much darker. Because while Emma twirls in her $25,000 dress, I'm calculating whether I can afford both textbooks and groceries this month. The math doesn't add up. It never does anymore. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my parents spent $200,000 on my sister's fairy tale wedding, while I ate ramen noodles and watched my college dreams crumble. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming, not even me. The betrayal went so much deeper than money. It cut straight through the heart of what family is supposed to mean. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever wondered why some people get everything while others get the leftovers, then you need to hear this story. Because what happened next changed everything, and by the end, you'll understand why sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. Let me take you back to where it all started. Growing up, Emma was the golden child. 3 years older, effortlessly beautiful, and blessed with the kind of charm that made adults melt. She could talk her way out of anything from broken curfews to failed math tests. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the straight A student, the daughter who never caused problems because I was too busy trying to earn the approval that came so naturally to my sister. Our parents, Linda and Robert Mitchell, owned a successful accounting firm in suburban Denver. We lived in a sprawling colonial house with perfectly manicured lawns, took family vacations to Europe every summer, and never worried about money. At least that's how it looked from the outside. The college fund conversation happened when I was 15, sitting around our mahogany dining table after Sunday dinner. Dad cleared his throat in that official way that meant serious business was about to be discussed. He pulled out a leather portfolio, the kind he used for important client meetings. "Girls," he said, adjusting his reading glasses, "your mother and I have been planning for your futures. We've set aside funds for both of your college educations, enough to cover 4 years at any university you choose, including living expenses." Emma barely looked up from her phone. At 18, she was already accepted to NYU for fashion merchandising, more interested in Manhattan's social scene than academic achievements. But for me, those words were everything. I'd been dreaming of studying pre-med at Stanford since I was 12 years old. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. "How much exactly?" I asked, always the practical one. "And 200,000 for each of you," Mom said with a proud smile. "We started saving before you were born. It's our gift to your futures. 400,000 total, split equally, fair and square." Or so I thought. The cracks in that promise began to show during Emma's senior year. She'd fallen in love with a boy named Marcus from her high school drama club. He was tall, devastatingly handsome, and came from old money, the kind of family that summered in the Hamptons and name-dropped senators at dinner parties. Emma was completely smitten, and Marcus seemed equally enchanted by her. When Emma announced their engagement at Christmas dinner during my sophomore year of high school, the room erupted in celebration. Mom cried tears of joy. Dad broke out the expensive champagne, and Emma glowed like she'd won the lottery. Which, in many ways, she had. Marcus's family was worth millions. "We're thinking a summer wedding after I graduate college," Emma gushed, showing off the 3-carat diamond that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Something elegant, maybe at the country club." But as the wedding planning progressed, elegant became extravagant, and extravagant became astronomical. Emma had always had expensive tastes, but engagement seemed to amplify every desire. The country club wasn't good enough anymore. She wanted the Ritz-Carlton, celebrity wedding planner from Los Angeles who designed events fittings. Mom had essentially become a full-time wedding coordinator for Hollywood stars. I watched from the sidelines as wedding expenses pieces and champagne selections every weekend involved venue tours and dress. The local florist wasn't sufficient. She needed the consumed our household conversations. Every dinner became a discussion of center, and Dad's credit cards were getting a serious workout. Don't worry about the cost, he'd tell Mom when she'd hesitate over some outrageous expense. This is our daughter's special day. We only get to do this once. The first real warning sign came during my junior year. I was researching Stanford's pre-med program requirements when I casually mentioned needing to start college application prep soon. About that, Dad said, not quite meeting my eyes. We might need to look at some more affordable options. Stanford is incredibly expensive, and with the wedding costs. His voice trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. But you said there was money set aside for my education, I reminded him, trying to keep my voice steady. There is, sweetheart. Just maybe not quite as much as we originally planned. State schools have excellent programs too. And think of all the money you'll save. State schools. The dream of Stanford, the vision I'd been nurturing for years, suddenly felt like it. Wedding expenses were a one-time thing. Once was slipping through my fingers. But I told myself it was temporary. Emma's college graduation approached. What started as a celebration for Emma's big day was over. Things would go back to normal. Except they didn't. The wedding planning intensified ass pieces from Italy, and a 12-piece orchestra imported roses from Ecuador. Hand-blown glass center oral budget alone exceeded what most people spend on their entire wedding. Emma wanted 200 guests, grew to 300, then 400. The FL flown in from New York. Each edition came with the same justification from my parents. It's Emma's special day. We want everything to be perfect. Meanwhile, I was taking on more responsibilities at home, tied my earnings to household expenses, and watch-time job at the local coffee shop contribute help offset costs. I got a Part D as my own college fund was quietly absorbed into the wedding machine. The breaking Fant moment. I'd worked incredibly hard during Point came 6 months before the wedding, during what should have been my triumph my senior year. Maintained a 4.0 GPA, scored in the 99th percentile early admission to Stanford with a partial academic scholarship, percentile on my SATs, and I burst through the front door, acceptance letter in hand, practically vibrating with excitement. I got in, I shouted, racing toward the living room where my parents were reviewing wedding vendor contracts with Emma. The response wasn't what I expected. Mom looked up briefly from a stack of catering menus. "That's nice, honey," she said distractedly. "About the lobster thermidor for Emma. What do you think the reception dinner?" Dad didn't even acknowledge my announcement. He was too busy calculating costs on his calculator, muttering under his breath about champagne quantities. I stood there holding my acceptance letter, feeling invisible in my own home. This was supposed to be one of the biggest seem to care. It die moments in my life, and nobody do hear what I said? I tried again, voice cracking slightly. I got into Stanford, planning binder. "Oh, that's great early admission." Emma glanced up from her wedding Sarah. "But remember what Dad said about state schools being more practical? Stanford is really expensive." The casual dismissal hit me like a physical blow. This was my and support my dreams. Instead, she was treating my achievement like an inconvenient detail, interrupting her wedding sister, the person who was supposed to celebrate my victories planning. That night, I confronted my parents directly. I found them in Dad's home office, surrounded by wedding receipts and vendor contracts. The numbers I glimpsed on those papers made my head spin. $50,000 for flowers, $30,000 for photography, $15,000 just for the wedding cake. We need to talk about my college fund, I said, closing the office door behind me. The look that passed between my parents told me everything I needed to know before either of them spoke. Sweetheart, Mom began carefully, we've had some unexpected expenses with the wedding. It's turned out to be more elaborate than we originally planned. How much is left? I asked directly. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. Well, we've had to borrow against your fund to cover some of the wedding costs, but we fully intend to pay it back before you start college. Borrowed against. The euphemism hung in the air between us. They hadn't borrowed anything. They'd spent my college money on Emma's wedding, plain and simple. How much is left? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Another exchange of glances, another long pause. About 30,000, Dad finally admitted. 30,000 out of 200,000. They'd spent $170,000 of my college education on flowers, photographers, and party favors for one single day. The room started spinning. I gripped the back of the chair in front of me, trying to process what I'd just heard. My dreams of becoming a doctor, of studying at one of the world's best universities had been sacrificed for my sister's Pinterest-perfect wedding. But you promised, I managed to say, hating how young and desperate I sounded. We know, honey, Mom said, reaching for my hand, and we feel terrible about it. But Emma's wedding is so important to Marcus's family. This is about more than just one day. It's about relationships, connections, our family's reputation in the community. Our family's reputation, not my future, not my dreams. Their social standing mattered more than my education. That's when I realized something that would change everything. This wasn't just about money. This was about value, about who mattered in our family hierarchy, about whose dreams were worth protecting, and whose could be sacrificed for appearances. I was about to learn just how far that hierarchy would take them, and how little I truly meant when it came time to choose sides. I walked out of that office in a daze, my legs carrying me upstairs to my bedroom on autopilot. The house felt different now, like I was seeing it through new eyes. The expensive artwork on the walls, the imported marble countertops, the crystal chandelier in the foyer. All of it suddenly felt hollow, like props in a play where I'd never been given a speaking role. I sat on my bed, staring at my Stanford acceptance letter, the words blurring together through my tears. This piece of paper represented everything I'd worked for, every late night studying, every extracurricular activity, every sacrifice I'd made to build the perfect college application, and my parents had traded it all away for table linens and champagne fountains. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Jenna. How did your parents react to Stanford? Are they freaking out with excitement? I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, still processing everything. The wedding preparations continued around me like I was invisible. Emma's dress fittings became weekly events that consumed entire Saturdays. Mom would return home with shopping bags full of wedding accessories, gushing about some new detail they discovered. Meanwhile, I was quietly researching student loans, work-study programs, and community college transfer options. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. While Emma complained about choosing between two equally stunning reception venues, I was calculating how many years it would take me to pay off the debt required to attend my dream school. While she debated whether to serve filet mignon or sea bass at the reception, I was pricing textbooks and trying to figure out how to afford basic necessities. But what hurt most wasn't the money itself. It was the complete disregard for my feelings, my future, my worth as their daughter. Every conversation in our house revolved around Emma's wants and needs. When I tried to bring up my college situation, I was met with vague reassurances and quick subject changes. We'll figure something out, became Dad's standard response whenever I pressed him about rebuilding my college fund. Don't stress about it right now. Mom would say. W through the wedding first. Getting through the wedding, like aving her hand dismissively. Let's just focus on getting. It was some unavoidable natural disaster we all had to endure, rather than an elaborate party they'd chosen to prioritize over their younger daughter's education. 3 months before the wedding, I discovered just how deep their financial commitment really went. I was looking for a phone charger in Dad's office when I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers. As I bent to collect them, one document caught my eye. It was a home equity loan approval letter they'd borrowed against our house to fund Emma's wedding. Our family home, the place where I'd grown up, where I'd studied for countless tests and dreamed about my future, was now collateral for my sister's one-day celebration. The amount made my stomach drop. Another $100,000 secured against the roof over our heads. I confronted them that same evening, document in hand. "You mortgaged our house?" I asked. My voice sheet. Dad's face went pale when he saw, waking with a mixture of anger and disbelief, the paper I was holding. "Sarah, you shouldn't be going through my private documents." "You mortgaged our house for Emma's wedding," I repeated, ignoring his deflection. Mom stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "It's not what you think, honey. It's just a precaution. We have plenty of equity and the business is doing well. It's perfectly safe." "Safe?" I laughed bitterly. "You've spent my entire college fund and now you're risking our home." For one day, one single day that Emma will barely remember in 10 years. "That's not fair," Emma interjected from the doorway. I hadn't noticed her enter the room. "This is my wedding, Sarah. The most important day of my life. Why can't you just be happy for me? The most important day of her life. More important than my education, my future, my dreams. More important than our family's financial security. I am happy for you," I said quietly. "But I don't understand why your happiness has to come at the cost of mine." Emma's face crumpled into the wounded expression she'd perfected since childhood. "I can't believe you're being so selfish. This is supposed to be a celebration, and you're making it all about money." Selfish. The word hit like a slap. I was being selfish for wanting the college education they'd promised me, for expecting my parents to honor their commitment to my future, for daring to suggest that maybe, just maybe, some of their attention and resources should be reserved for their other daughter. "You're right," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I am being selfish. I'm being selfish for believing that my dreams mattered too." The tension in the room was suffocating. Dad cleared his throat, attempting to restore some semblance of peace. "Look, everyone's emotions are running high. Sarah, we understand you're disappointed, but we're family. We support each other. Emma's wedding is important to all of us, but apparently my education was only important to me. That night, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I researched every scholarship, grant, and financial aid opportunity I could find. I applied for dozens of programs, wrote countless essays, and submitted applications to schools I'd never considered before. If my parents weren't going to invest in my future, I'd find another way. The responses started coming back over the following weeks. Some rejections, but also some acceptances. A partial scholarship here, a small grant there. It wasn't enough for Stanford, but it might be enough for a good state school if I worked part-time and lived frugally. I also started documenting everything. Every wedding expense, every broken promise, every dismissive comment. I told myself it was just for my own records, to help me make sense of what was happening. But deep down, I think I knew I was building a case. Evidence of how thoroughly my family had abandoned me in favor of appearances and social status. The final straw came 3 weeks before the wedding. I'd been accepted to piece together enough financial aid to make it work to the University of Colorado with a partial academic scholarship, and I'd manage. It wasn't Stanford, but it was a solid school with a good pre-med program. I was actually starting to feel hopeful about my future. That optimism shattered when I overheard a phone conversation between Mom and Emma. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when their voices carried from the living room. "I just think," Emma was saying. "I mean, she thinks Sarah's being dramatic about the whole college is smart enough to get scholarships wherever she goes. It's not like she really needed our help anyway." "I know, sweetheart," Mom replied. "Your father and I have been feeling guilty, but you're right. Sarah has always been so independent and capable. She'll figure it out. She always does. She'll figure it out. She always does." 27 words that summer as someone deserving of support and investment, but as someone who collized exactly how my family saw me. Not be counted on to solve her own problems while they focused on more important things, like Emma's happiness. I stood frozen in that kitchen, glass of water forgotten in my hand, as the full weight of my situation settled over me. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't going to get better after the wedding. My parents genuinely believed that sacrificing my future for Emma's wedding was not only acceptable, but justified. They saw me as the strong one, the capable one, the one who didn't need help. What they didn't realize was that strength born from necessity isn't strength at all. It's survival. And I'd been in survival mode for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly supported and valued. But something else was crystal understanding that if I was truly on my own, the nizing in that moment too. A cold, clear. I needed to start acting like it. No more hoping they'd change their minds. No more waiting for them to remember their promises to me. It was time to take control of my own narrative. The wedding was 3 weeks away. Emma would get her fairy tale day, complete with every expensive detail she'd dreamed of. But after that, things were going to change. I was going to make sure of it. Because sometimes when people show you who they really are, the most powerful thing you can do is believe them, and then plan accordingly. The wedding day arrived with the kind of perfect June weather that wedding planners dream about. Clear skies, gentle breeze, 72 degrees. Emma looked absolutely radiant as she glided down the aisle of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, her train flowing behind her like liquid silk. The 300 guests gasped in appreciation as she passed, and I had to admit, despite everything, she looked like a princess from a fairy tale. I sat in the third row, wearing a dress I'd bought on clearance from Target, watching $200,000 of my college education walk toward the altar. The flowers alone probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Imported white roses cascaded from crystal vases, each centerpiece a work of art that would be thrown away by morning. The ceremony was flawless. Emma and Marcus exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising eternal love while standing beneath an arch of peonies that had been flown in from Holland. The photographer, who Mom had bragged cost more than most people's cars, captured every tear, every smile, every perfectly orchestrated moment. During the reception, I found myself mentally cataloging the expenses. The 12-piece orchestra playing during dinner. The ice sculpture shaped like swans that was already melting under the ballroom lights. The champagne fountain that bubbled with Dom Perignon at $300 a bottle. Each detail represented hours of my future work-study jobs, years of student loan payments, dreams deferred or abandoned entirely. But what struck me most wasn't the extravagance. It was the joy on my parents' faces. Dad beamed with pride as he walked Emma down the aisle. Mom cried genuine tears of happiness during the father-daughter dance. They were so completely invested in Emma's perfect day that they seemed to have forgotten their other daughter existed. When people asked where I was going to college, I smiled and said the University of Colorado. Their polite congratulations felt hollow when Emma's Stanford-bound cousin received far more enthusiastic responses. The hierarchy was clear even to strangers. Emma was the star. I was the supporting character in my own family's story. The wedding favors were small crystal boxes filled with French chocolates, each one costing more than I spent on groceries in a week. As guests collected their gifts and prepared to leave, I overheard Emma's new mother-in-law praising my parents for their generosity and taste. "You've given Emma such a beautiful start to her marriage," Mrs. Henderson said, kissing Mom's cheek. This wedding will be talked about for years." Mom practically glowed under the praise. We just wanted everything perfect for our little girl. Their little girl. Singular. Not their girls. Plural. The language revealed everything. After the last guest departed and the vendors began cleaning up, I helped gather Emma's gifts and personal items. There were hundreds of presents, many from people I'd never met. Crystal, china, artwork, jewelry. Emma's new life was being furnished by other people's generosity, while I was calculating whether I could afford both a meal plan and textbooks. 2 days after the wedding, Emma and Marcus left for their honeymoon in Tuscany. Another gift from my parents, naturally. 2 weeks in a luxury villa with private chefs and guided tours of wineries. The cost of their honeymoon could have covered my entire freshman year tuition. With Emma gone and the wedding stress finally over, I expected things to return to some version of normal. Maybe we could have a real conversation about my college situation. Maybe Dad would present a plan for rebuilding my education fund. Maybe Mom would acknowledge the sacrifice I'd made for Emma's perfect day. Instead, I found them planning their next project. Emma and Marcus needed help with a down payment on a house. Young couples these days, Dad explained, couldn't afford the kind of neighborhoods they'd grown up in. They needed family support to get started. Family support. The phrase that had become meaningless when applied to me. I listened to them discuss gifting Emma and Marcus another $100,000 for their dream home, money that would come from the same home equity loan that had already consumed my college fund. They were doubling down on their investment in Emma's happiness, while I remained an afterthought. That's when I realized something that would change everything. This wasn't going to stop with the wedding. Emma would always be their priority, their investment, their focus. There would always be another milestone, another need, another reason why Emma's wants came before my needs. I spent the rest of that summer working double shifts at the coffee shop, saving every penny for college while my parents house hunted with Emma and Marcus in exclusive neighborhoods. I watched them get excited about granite countertops and walk-in closets, while I stressed about buying textbooks and winter clothes. The dynamic had shifted permanently. Emma was now the married daughter, the one building a family legacy they could be proud of. I was still just Sarah, the one who would figure it out on her own because she always did. But I was learning something valuable during those long summer days of serving overpriced lattes to entitled customers. I was learning that I didn't need their approval or their money to build something meaningful. Every dollar I saved was mine. Every decision I made was mine. Every success I achieved would be mine. When August arrived and it was time to leave for college, my parents helped Emma and Marcus move into their new house instead of helping me pack for my dorm. They were too busy hanging artwork and arranging furniture to drive me to campus. I took a Greyhound bus, carrying everything I owned in 2 suitcases and a backpack. The bus ride was 4 hours of watching Colorado landscape roll by while I processed the magnitude of what had happened. My family had essentially traded me for Emma's happiness, and they'd done it so gradually, so reasonably, that they probably didn't even realize it was happening. But I realized something else during that bus ride, something that would fuel everything I did next. They had underestimated me completely. They saw me as the responsible one, the one who didn't need help, the one who would quietly accept whatever scraps were left after Emma's needs were met. What they didn't see was the steel core that all those years of neglect had forged inside me. They didn't realize that every dismissal, every broken promise, every time they chose Emma over me had been building something unbreakable in my spirit. College became my sanctuary. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who valued intelligence over charm, achievement over appearance, substance over superficiality. My professors didn't care about my family drama or my sister's wedding. They cared about my work, my ideas, my potential. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that surprised even me. Pre-med was brutal, but every challenging class felt like proof that I belonged there despite my family's lack of investment. I worked in the campus library, tutored other students, and applied for every scholarship opportunity I could find. My academic advisor, Dr. Martinez, became the first adult in years who seemed genuinely interested in my success. When I mentioned my family situation during a meeting about medical school applications, she looked genuinely shocked. "Sarah, you're one of the most dedicated students I've ever worked with," she said, reviewing my transcript. "Your family should be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished with so little support." Should be, but they weren't. My perfect GPA and research opportunities barely registered during our monthly phone calls. Mom was always distracted by Emma's latest decorating project or social event. Dad asked generic questions about my classes while clearly thinking about other things. Meanwhile, Emma's every achievement was celebrated like a national holiday. When she got a part-time job at a boutique, Mom posted about it on Facebook like she'd been promoted to CEO. When Marcus got a raise at his finance job, Dad talked about it for weeks. But when I made Dean's List 3 consecutive semesters, the response was a distracted, "That's nice, honey." The pattern was so consistent, it became predictable. Emma's minor accomplishments were major celebrations. My major accomplishments were minor acknowledgments. The wedding had simply been the most extreme example of a dynamic that had existed my entire life. But something was building inside me during those college years. A clarity about what I deserved and what I was willing to accept. Every slight, every dismissal, every time they prioritized Emma's comfort over my needs was being carefully cataloged and processed. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was planning. And by my junior year, I had a plan that would change everything. The revelation that would turn everything upside down came during Christmas break of my junior year. I was home for exactly 4 days, just long enough to attend the obligatory family gatherings before heading back to campus. Emma and Marcus had moved into an even larger house, funded by another generous gift from my parents. They were talking about starting a family, which had Mom and Dad practically vibrating with excitement about becoming grandparents. I was helping Mom clean up after Christmas dinner when she casually mentioned something that stopped me cold. "Oh, I forgot to tell you," she said, loading plates into the dishwasher. "We got the final numbers from your dad's accountant about the tax benefits from Emma's wedding expenses. Apparently, we can write off quite a bit since it was technically a business entertainment expense. Some of Dad's biggest clients were there. Tax benefits, business entertainment expense." They hadn't just spent my college money on Emma's wedding. They'd spent it in a way that would actually save them money come tax season. The room started spinning as the implications hit me. Not only had they prioritized Emma's wants over my needs, they'd done it in a way that financially benefited them. My dreams had been sacrificed for their tax strategy. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I went through Dad's home office systematically, photographing documents and making copies of everything I could find. Bank statements, loan applications, tax returns, wedding vendor contracts. I built a comprehensive picture of exactly how my college fund had been dismantled and redistributed. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The money hadn't just been spent on Emma's wedding. It had been leveraged, borrowed against, and manipulated in ways that made it impossible to recover. Even if they wanted to rebuild my education fund, which they clearly didn't, the financial instruments they'd used made it legally complicated. But I also found something else, something that would give me the power to change everything. Hidden in a folder marked insurance, I discovered documentation of a college savings plan that had been set up by my grandparents before they died. Money that was legally mine, but that my parents had been managing and had apparently forgotten about in their rush to fund Emma's lifestyle. $50,000. Not enough for Stanford, but enough to change my entire situation. The next morning, I confronted them with everything I'd found. Every document, every broken promise, every financial manipulation that had traded my future for Emma's comfort. I laid it all out on the dining room table, like evidence in a trial. I want access to the account my grandparents set up for me, I said calmly, and I want a full accounting of exactly what happened to the college fund you promised me. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma, who'd been planning to show off her new jewelry, suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. Mom and Dad exchanged the kind of look that passes between co-conspirators who've just been caught. What happened next would expose the true nature of our family dynamic and set in motion a series of events that would change all of our lives forever. Dad's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, anger, then something that looked almost like respect. He'd never seen me take control of a situation like this before. Mom just stared at the papers spread across our polished dining table, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "Sarah," Dad finally said, his voice carefully controlled, "you've been going through my private files." "Your private files that contain my money," I replied, holding up the bank statements. "Money that my grandparents specifically designated for my education. Money that you've been managing without telling me it existed." Mom found her voice then, but it came out as a whisper. "We were going to tell you about that account when you graduated." It was supposed to be a surprise. A surprise. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Like the surprise of discovering my college fund had been spent on imported flowers and champagne fountains. Emma appeared in the doorway, drawn by the tension in our voices. She took one look at the financial documents scattered across the table, and her face paled. "What's going on?" "Your sister has decided to air our private family business," Dad said, his tone sharp with disapproval. "Our private family business," I repeated slowly, "includes spending my inheritance on your wedding, while lying to me about money that was legally mine. Today, I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell, graduating top of my medical school class on a full merit scholarship I earned myself. My parents weren't there to see me receive my degree, but my chosen family was. Sometimes the greatest gift your family can give you is showing you exactly who they are, so you can choose to become someone better. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear that their dreams matter too."